Some places don't just house secrets, they embody them. Welcome to St. Albine, a mysterious orphanage nestled deep in the Pennsylvania mountains, a place where innocence and dread walk hand in hand. My name is Elias Wren, and I came here seeking peace, a quiet place to hide from my past. Instead, I was given 3 strange rules just to stay alive. What's the creepiest thing you've ever seen in a children's drawing? Tell me in the comments below. Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to walk these corridors after dark, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell, because at St. Albine the art, it wants to be seen. Let's check under the bed. I still wake up, smelling antiseptic and old stone. The scent of St. Albine burned into my memory. I went there seeking peace after the whispers at the Sunnyside rest home became too loud, seeking solace in the presumed innocence of children. They gave me a small cottage on the grounds of that sprawling, Gothic orphanage, nestled deep in the Pennsylvania mountains, and 3 simple rules for my role as a caretaker. Carry a small crucifix when walking the old corridors. Always check under the beds before tucking the children in. Sometimes there's an extra child. And never, ever let them draw you in their pictures. Old Mr. Hemlock, the groundskeeper who hired me, a man whose eyes held a sorrow too deep for words, just shook his head when I asked why. He only muttered that the last caretaker who ignored the drawings wasn't just gone. He was erased. St. Albine Orphanage rose from the mist-shrouded Pennsylvania hills like a forgotten headstone. Its gray stone walls streaked with ancient damp, its narrow windows staring out like vacant eyes. The wind, a constant, mournful presence here, sighed through the skeletal branches of overgrown oaks, carrying the faint, cloying scent of something sweetish and decaying beneath the pervasive sharpness of industrial cleaner. It was a place where silence seemed to have weight, pressing down, broken only by the distant, jarring laughter of unseen children, or the rhythmic creak of a weather vane shaped like a gaunt, pointing finger. My name is Elias Wren. My name is Elias Wren. I came to St. Albine looking for an ending, or perhaps a quiet intermission. The last chapter, at Sunnyside, had ended abruptly. My attempts to voice concerns about the irregularities, the way elderly patients seemed to simply dissolve from the records, met with polite disbelief and eventual dismissal. They'd called it stress, a morbid imagination. I called it an unease that settled deep in the marrow. Children, I'd thought, would be different. Their fears, their shadows, surely more transparent. The main hall was cavernous, its vaulted ceiling lost in gloom, the walls lined with an unnerving profusion of children's artwork, bright, chaotic splashes of color. Yes, but also drawings of unnerving symmetry, of figures with 2 long limbs, or eyes that were simply black voids. A young girl, perhaps 10, with dark, watchful eyes and a smudge of crimson on her cheek, observed me silently from a shadowy alcove. This was Mila. Nearby, a slightly older boy with a defiant tilt to his chin, Joey, openly stared. Reed Holloway, the art therapist, was an island of curated cheerfulness in this ocean of gray. He emerged from a brightly lit room, the scent of turpentine and linseed oil clinging to him like a second skin. His smile was wide, his manner easy, and he wore thin, paint-stained cotton gloves. Elias, welcome. The children have been so eager to meet you. His voice was a warm balm, though his eyes, a shade too bright, never quite lost a certain assessing sharpness. His art room, glimpsed through the open door, was a riot of color and light, a stark contrast to the rest of the institution. Later, Mrs. Gable, the matronly, soon-to-retire administrator, whose face seemed permanently etched with a weary resignation, handed me a typed sheet of paper. The usual guidelines, Mr. Wren, she'd said, her voice low, avoiding eye contact. And these particular house rules, Mr. Hemlock insisted, for your own smooth transition. The 3 rules, precisely as Hemlock had forewarned. Her emphasis on smooth transition felt less like a wish and more like a thinly veiled threat. That first night, alone in my small cottage, the wind seemed to whisper names around the ill-fitting window frames. When I did my initial walk through the dormitory wing, the old corridor stretched before me like the gullets of some sleeping beast. A sudden, unnatural cold spot in the hallway near the older, disused section made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I fumbled in my pocket for the crucifix Mrs. Gable had vaguely mentioned I should procure. It wasn't there. I hadn't thought to get one yet. The cold deepened, and a faint, almost inaudible sigh seemed to brush past my ear. I quickened my pace. The rhythm of St. Albine began to assert itself, a monotonous cycle of mealtimes, lessons, and the muted, supervised play of children who seemed to carry a collective, unspoken burden. I tried to adhere to the rules, their quiet absurdity a constant, unsettling hum beneath the surface of my duties. The crucifix was the first I addressed. The orphanage had a small, dusty chapel, largely unused. In its dim recesses, I found Brother Kellen, the librarian. He was an ancient man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes holding a profound, sorrowful wisdom. He was mute, communicating through gestures and painstakingly written notes. When I gestured, explaining my need, he looked at me with an unnerving intensity, then produced a small, worn crucifix of dark, heavy wood from the folds of his cassock. He pressed it into my palm, his own hand surprisingly cold, and then, with trembling fingers, scrawled on a scrap of paper, "Matron fears true blood. Ink is not enough." The words, cryptic and chilling, offered no comfort. The second rule became a nightly ritual of dread. Tucking the children in, I'd force myself to kneel, to peer into the Stygian blackness beneath each narrow bed. Usually there was nothing but dust motes dancing in the beam of my small penlight, and the occasional lost sock. But one night, under Mila Thatcher's bed, my light caught them. Two small, bare feet, side by side. Mila was in her bed above, her breathing soft and even. These other feet, pale and still, were attached to nothing visible. As I stared, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. They twitched, then slowly, deliberately, retracted deeper into the impenetrable shadow, as if an unseen puppeteer had pulled their strings. When I managed to speak, my voice a dry croak, Mila murmured in her sleep, her words shockingly clear. "If you see two, Mr. Wren, you must know which one isn't dreaming." I rose, a cold sweat drenching my shirt, pretending I'd merely been checking for drafts. Mila, I noticed, was an incessant artist. Her preferred medium was a single, vivid crimson pencil, clutched tight in her small hand. Her drawings, pinned to the bulletin board with a defiant flourish, were ostensibly of flowers, houses, other children, but always there was a disquieting element, a shadow looming too large behind a smiling stick figure. Trees with grasping, skeletal branches, a sun that wept red tears. The crimson was the color of fresh blood, stark against the cheap paper. A few days later, another boy, a quiet 7-year-old named Samuel, proudly showed me a drawing I'd made in Reed Holloway's art class. It was a portrait of Reed himself, rendered with an unsettling, almost photographic accuracy for a child his age. Reed was smiling, his head tilted in that characteristic friendly way. But his eyes, Samuel had captured their brightness, yes, but also something else. A fixed, unblinking intensity. As I looked, I had the distinct, chilling sensation that the eyes in the drawing were not looking at Samuel, but past him, directly at me. That night, checking under Samuel's bed revealed only dust, but the air in his small section of the dormitory felt colder, emptier. A subtle wrongness began to permeate St. Albine like a creeping stain. The children's artwork, those countless pinned-up testaments to young imaginations, started to shift. I'd walk down a corridor in the morning and notice a detail in a familiar drawing had altered overnight. A smiling face in a group portrait would now bear a downturned, sorrowful mouth. The vibrant blue of a painted sky would be muted, imbued with a bruised, stormy gray. Sometimes, a figure would be missing entirely, leaving a faint, smudged outline where it once stood, as if imperfectly erased. I tried to convince myself it was tricks of memory, the play of light in these perpetually dim hallways. But the conviction grew. The canvases were not static. The children themselves began to exhibit unsettling lapses. Names, once familiar, would be fumbled, forgotten. Mila once called Samuel Timothy, then looked confused when he didn't respond. Another child, a boisterous girl named Clara, insisted for an entire afternoon that her best friend, who sat beside her at every meal, was named Lily, a name no one else recognized. Some of the younger ones started referring to me not as Mr. Wren, but as the Picture Man, or sometimes, in hushed, fearful tones, the Keeper of the Red Key. Though I carried no such item, and red was a color conspicuously absent from the Orphanage strap decor, save for Mila's ever-present crimson pencil. My search for answers led me back to Brother Kellen and the orphanage's neglected library, a repository of crumbling ledgers and forgotten histories. The official records of St. Albine were sparse, sanitized, but tucked away in a locked cabinet Kellen reluctantly opened for me were older, handwritten journals. They spoke of a white lady, a pale matron, a figure from the orphanage's earliest days in the late 19th century, a woman of rumored dark practices involving the most vulnerable children who met a fiery, unlamented end. The descriptions of her appearance, a flowing white and black gown, long, unbound hair, a face of bone china pallor, sent a chill of recognition through me, echoing the unsettling forms I sometimes glimpsed in the more disturbing children's art. Joey Maddox, the sharp-eyed, rebellious older boy, found me there one afternoon. He was wary, but there was a desperate intelligence in his gaze. "It's Mr. Holloway," he whispered, after ensuring we were alone, the scent of old paper and dust thick around us. He talks to them, the quiet ones, the ones who draw. Different. He tells them to draw what they really see, not just what's there. Joey's eyes darted towards a particularly unsettling finger, painting on a nearby wall, a swirl of black and crimson that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. "He doesn't just teach art, Mr. Wren. I think he's unlocking something in the pictures." That evening, I saw Mila in a quiet corner of the common room, her crimson pencil flying across a fresh sheet of paper. She was humming a tuneless little song, a habit I'd noticed when she was deeply engrossed. Curious, I approached. She hastily covered her drawing, but not before I caught a glimpse. It was a crude, childlike rendering, yet unmistakably, horrifyingly clear. A stick figure, recognizably male, with my own slightly unruly brown hair, hanging from a gibbet. His drawn eyes were wide, black, empty. Mila looked up at me, her own eyes unreadable, then quickly turned back to her work, the crimson pencil scratching. I told myself it was nothing, a child's dark fantasy, but the image burned itself onto my retinas. The unease at St. Albine began to solidify, constricting around me like a cold, invisible hand. The third rule, don't let the children draw you in their pictures, had transformed from a curious instruction into a palpable, pressing dread. Lily, a sweet, shy girl who usually greeted me with a hesitant smile, suddenly became withdrawn, her eyes darting away whenever I approached. One afternoon, I found her in the deserted playroom, her small back to me hunched over a sketchbook. The telltale crimson of Mila's favorite pencil was in her hand. My heart lurched. "Lily," I said, my voice softer than I intended. She jumped, whirling around, her face a mask of panic. She tried to hide the sketchbook, but I saw it, a nascent, clumsy outline of a man's face, my face, the beginnings of my features, traced in that vivid, blood-like red. "Oh, Lily, no," I said, a strange coldness seeping through me. "Mr. Holloway says the caretakers don't like being in pictures. It's a A privacy thing. The lie felt clumsy on my tongue, but Lily's reaction was immediate and startling. The terror in her eyes dissolved, replaced by an almost fervent relief. She nodded quickly, wordlessly, and slammed the sketchbook shut. The encounter left me deeply unsettled. Why such fear? And why the specific instruction about me? Samuel, the boy who had drawn Reed Holloway with such unnerving accuracy, was visibly fading. Not physically, but in some essential, vital way. His laughter, once frequent, was now rare and hollow. His interactions were listless, his eyes often unfocused, as if seeing something beyond the grimy walls of the orphanage. One evening, as I was performing the nightly ritual of checking under the beds, my penlight beam fell on Samuel's space. 2 Samuels lay there. One in the bed, breathing shallowly, a pale imitation of the boy I knew. The other, beneath the bed, was an exact replica, its eyes wide open, unblinking, fixed on me with an expression of serene, chilling emptiness. Its chest did not move. As I stared, paralyzed, the lips of the underbed Samuel curved into a slow, knowing smile. Then it simply dissolved, like mist in sunlight, leaving only dust and shadow. The next morning, the Samuel in the bed moved, spoke, ate. But he wasn't Samuel. Not anymore. The spark was gone. His eyes, when they met mine, were as vacant as the replicas had been. The disappearance of Joey Maddox was the final brutal confirmation. Reed Holloway reported finding the art room in disarray, paint spilled, canvases slashed, and Joey, sullen and defiant, was confined to the quiet room in the infirmary wing. When I went to check on him later that evening, bringing a contraband cookie, the room was empty, spotless, as if no one had been there for days. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of how he might have left the locked room. Only on the small, cloudy mirror above the wash basin, a single, childlike handprint in what looked chillingly like dried blood, and beneath it, scrawled backwards, as if written by someone looking out of the mirror. Not a child, something else. A frantic search of the art rooms refused. Then later that night yielded a torn fragment of a canvas. It was a portrait, clearly in Reed's more sophisticated style, of a young woman with tired eyes and a forced smile. Miss Albright, the caretaker who had, according to Mrs. Gable, resigned without notice just before my arrival. Her painted eye stared out from the canvas fragment with an expression of mute, unending terror. The rest of her, the majority of the portrait, was gone, erased. The torn portrait of Miss Albright, the chilling message on the mirror. They were no longer isolated anomalies, but pieces of a horrifying, coalescing truth. Brother Kellen, sensing my growing desperation, finally shared his deepest secret. From a hollowed-out ancient Bible in the library, he retrieved a slim, leather-bound diary, its pages brittle, the ink faded to a ghostly brown. It was the journal of Brother Thomas, a monk who had served St. Albine a century ago. A man who had tried and failed to combat the entity he called Mater Lacrimarum, the mother of tears, the Pale Matron. His writings were a fractured, terrified account of a being intrinsically bound to the orphanage's very foundations, an entity that fed on the sorrow and innocence of children, that sought to manifest through their fears and their art. She must be seen to be, Brother Thomas had scrawled, rendered anew by innocent hands, for her old form is but shadow and ash. The canvas is her doorway, the child's eye her window. The matron, burned for her necromantic rites with the orphans of her time, was a parasitic echo, needing to be redrawn into existence. Armed with this terrifying knowledge, I confronted Reed Holloway. I found him in the art room, the air thick with the usual smells of paint and solvent, but also, tonight, an undercurrent of something else. That cloying, sickly sweetness I'd come to associate with the orphanage's deeper malignancy. He was standing before a large easel draped with a canvas sheet, humming softly to himself, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. "Joey's gone, Reed," I said, my voice tight. The crucifix Brother Kellen had given me clutched in my pocket, its wood warm against my palm. Just like Miss Albright, just like countless others, I suspect, over the years. Reed turned, his smile as serene and practiced as ever, but his eyes held a new, feverish light. Ah, Elias, always so observant. Joey had such potential, such a vibrant, tormented little soul. He saw things so clearly. "What did you do to him, Reed? What are you doing to these children?" He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Doing? I am an artist, Elias. I am a conduit. I simply guide them, help them express what is already inside. Help them express what is already inside." The matron, she appreciates true talent. She understands the power of a perfectly rendered fear, a truly captured sorrow. He gestured to the draped easel. She has been incomplete for so long, a sketch waiting for her final lines. The truth, when it came, was more twisted than I could have imagined. Reed, it turned out, was not merely aware of the Pale Matron. He was her devotee, her high priest. His gloves, I realized with a sickening lurch, weren't for cleanliness or allergies. They were to hide the ritualistic scars, the small, self-inflicted cuts from which he would bless certain canvases with his own blood, awakening them, making them more receptive to the matron's influence. His own childhood had been a canvas of torment, orchestrated by a mother who saw artistic genius in her son's pain. He hadn't found solace in art. He'd found a perverse reflection of his own suffering. And in the Pale Matron, a dark muse who promised to elevate that suffering into something eternal. "She chose me, Elias," Reed whispered, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "Just as she chooses the children with the truest sight, I help them give form to her essence, and in return, their souls, their art, it lives forever, unchanged." "Perfect." He pulled the sheet from the easel. The painting beneath was monstrous. It was a portrait, rendered with a chilling, almost photorealistic detail of the Pale Matron. She stood in her Victorian morning gown, black lace stark against the unearthly white of her skin. Her long, dark hair, unkempt, seemed to writhe like snakes, touching the floor. Her face was a smooth, bone-white oval, devoid of eyes, yet somehow I felt an intense, malevolent gaze emanating from it. Her long, skeletal fingers, tipped with nails like shards of obsidian, dripped a viscous black ichor. The background was a swirling vortex of suffering faces, children's faces, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths open in silent screams. And woven into the fabric of her gown, almost imperceptible at first, were the visages of Miss Albright, of Joey, of Samuel, their features distorted, absorbed. "She needs to be fully seen, Elias," Reed said, his voice now imbued with that same unnatural resonance I'd heard from the depths of Tunnel 7 in Black Hollow. "To be anchored in this reality. And for that, she needs a final willing portrait, one infused with a strong living spirit." As he spoke, the temperature in the room plummeted. The paint on the canvases around the room began to bubble and run, the colors darkening, bleeding into each other. The children's cheerful drawings warped, their smiling figures contorting into grotesque parodies. Mila Thatcher stood in the doorway, her eyes glazed, her crimson pencil clutched in her hand. She was working on a small sketch pad, her movements jerky, unnatural. She was drawing me. The Pale Matron in the painting moved, her lipless mouth stretched into an impossible silent shriek. One of her long, blood-tipped fingers extended from the canvas, elongating, a tendril of living shadow reaching out into the room. It brushed against a nearby stack of finished artwork, and the drawings instantly curled and blackened, as if touched by acid. "Mila, child, he's ready now," Reed crooned, his gaze fixed on me with a predatory intensity. "Draw, Mr. Wren. Draw his lovely, troubled soul for our mother. Mila's pencil scratched faster, the crimson lines defining my unwilling likeness with terrifying speed. I could feel a coldness seeping into me, a psychic drain, as if my very essence were being siphoned onto the page. The matron's painted form seemed to swell, to become more substantial. I fumbled for the crucifix. Reed laughed, a high, crackling sound. "Oh, that little trinket. She appreciates faith, Elias. It makes the soul so much richer." But as I pulled it out, my hand, scraped raw during my earlier frantic search through the library, brushed against the sharp edge of the wooden cross. A smear of my own fresh blood, bright red, stained its surface. I shoved it forward towards the advancing tendril from the painting. The effect was instantaneous. The matron's shadowy limb recoiled as if burned, a silent hiss like escaping steam, emanating from the canvas. The painted figure flickered, its form momentarily losing cohesion. Brother Kellen's words echoed in my mind. Matron fears true blood. This wasn't just a symbol. It was a conduit for something vital she couldn't tolerate. Reed's smile vanished, replaced by a snarl of fury. "No, you will not ruin this. She is almost complete." He lunged not at me, but at Mila, grabbing her small hand, trying to force the crimson pencil across the nearly finished sketch of my face. Mila cried out, a small frightened sound. This was it. The painting, the ritual, my life. It all hung on these next few desperate seconds. I had to destroy that conduit, that final damning portrait of myself, and somehow I had to reach the child before Reed and his dark muse consumed her completely. Reed's grip on Mila's wrist was like iron, his face a mask of fanatical desperation. The pale matron, momentarily repulsed by the blood on the crucifix, was already reasserting her terrifying presence. The painted ichor on her fingers sizzling as new tendrils of shadow began to ooze from the canvas, reaching, probing. The air in the art room was thick with her malevolence, a palpable, suffocating cold. Mila's crimson sketch of me was nearly complete. I could feel a horrifying tug, a sensation of my own vitality being drawn towards that small, damning rectangle of paper. There was no time for finesse, no room for hesitation. My earlier frantic search through the orphanage's poorly maintained storage rooms had yielded not just Brother Thomas's diary, but also a rusted can of turpentine and another of linseed oil, remnants of some long-forgotten art project. They sat on a nearby supply shelf. "Let her go, Reed," I yelled, my voice raw. I lunged, not at Reed, but at that shelf. With a sweep of my arm, I sent the cans clattering to the floor. Turpentine, oily and pungent, gushed across the wooden floorboards, quickly followed by the thicker, stickier linseed oil. The fumes were immediate, acrid. Reed, momentarily distracted by my sudden action, loosened his grip on Mila. "What are you doing, fool?" he shrieked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You'll destroy it all. The perfection." "Some things aren't meant to be perfect, Reed." I snatched a discarded rag, a forgotten paint-splattered cloth, from a workbench. The matron's shadowy tendrils were now inches from Mila, who stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror. My own nearly finished portrait on her sketch pad pulsed with a faint, unholy light. I had to break her connection to it. I grabbed the sketch pad from Mila's unresisting hand, the paper strangely cold, thrumming with a faint, repellent energy. With my other hand, I fumbled for the Zippo lighter I always carried, a relic from a past I rarely thought about. The matron on the large canvas let out a silent, psychic scream that reverberated through my skull. Her entire form seemed to surge forward, her featureless face contorting in an expression of pure, unadulterated rage. Reed, realizing my intent, abandoned Mila and charged at me, his gloved hands outstretched like claws. "The mistress will not be denied," he snarled, his voice no longer human, but a chorus of harsh, guttural whispers. He was fast, but desperation lent me speed. I flicked the Zippo. The flame caught on the rag, small at first, then blossoming. Reed slammed into me. We both stumbled, the lit rag flying from my hand. It landed squarely in the spreading pool of turpentine and oil. The world erupted in a whoosh of orange and yellow. Flames leaped up the walls with terrifying speed, devouring the children's artwork, the canvases curling and blackening, their painted smiles melting into grotesque, screaming grimaces. The heat was instantaneous, brutal. Reed screamed, a high, thin sound of agony and fury, as flames licked at his paint-stained clothes. He thrashed, trying to beat them out, but the oils made him a human torch. The pale matron in the master portrait shrieked again, her painted form writhing, blistering, the canvas beginning to char and peel away from the frame. The shadowy tendrils retracted, sizzling and dissolving as they touched the encroaching fire. My first priority was Mila. I grabbed her, shielding her small body with my own, and shoved her towards the door. "Run, Mila! Get out!" Then, I turned back to the inferno. The sketch of me, the one Mila had nearly completed, lay on the floor near the spreading flames, still pulsing with that faint, malevolent light. It was the anchor. I had to destroy it. Ignoring the searing heat, the choking smoke, I lunged for it. My hand closed around the sketchpad just as the edge of it began to smolder. The matron's psychic assault intensified, a wave of pure despair and icy rage washing over me, trying to paralyze me. I could see her, not just in the burning master portrait, but in my mind's eye. A withered, ancient thing of ash and spite, her power unraveling. With a defiant roar, I thrust the sketchpad deep into the heart of the roaring fire. The paper ignited instantly, the crimson lines of my portrait flaring brightly for a moment, before being consumed by black char. As it burned, I felt a profound psychic snap, as if a cord connecting me to something vast and malevolent had been violently severed. The pressure in my skull vanished. The matron's master portrait was now a roaring pyre, her painted form contorting into a final, silent rictus of agony before dissolving into ash and embers. Reed Holloway lay a few feet away, a smoldering, unrecognizable heap. The art room was an inferno. Coughing, my eyes streaming, I stumbled out, half carrying a now limp, traumatized Mila. The screams of other children, the frantic shouts of the few remaining staff, echoed down the corridors as smoke billowed through St. Albine. The fire alarm, an ancient clanging bell, finally began its belated, useless clamor. The cleansing fire. It was a terrible, desperate absolution. The wail of sirens, when it finally cut through the night, was the sound of a world intruding, a world that could never comprehend the true nature of the inferno it had come to fight. St. Albine Orphanage, or what was left of its oldest wing, burned with a furious, almost sentient intensity. The firefighters, grim-faced and efficient, battled the blaze, their powerful hoses an inadequate counterpoint to the unholy energies that had been unleashed and perhaps partially consumed. I sat on the damp grass of the lawn, Mila wrapped in a coarse fire blanket beside me, her small body trembling uncontrollably. She hadn't spoken a word since we'd escaped the art room. Other children, wide-eyed and terrified, were huddled nearby, tended to by the shell-shocked remnants of the staff. Mrs. Gable was there, her face a mask of horrified disbelief, muttering about faulty wiring, about old buildings. The official story, when it eventually solidified from the ashes and interrogations, would be just that. Faulty wiring, a tragic accident. Elias Wren, the relatively new caretaker, was a hero for having rescued several children, though perhaps a little careless, leaving flammable art supplies unsecured. Reed Holloway, the beloved art therapist, was a tragic victim, unable to escape the blaze he might have unknowingly exacerbated. There was no mention of the Pale Matron, no talk of cursed canvases or blood rituals. The world preferred its horrors neat, explicable. St. Albine was condemned, its blackened shell a monument to secrets best left buried. The children were dispersed, sent to other facilities, other towns, carrying with them scars that no official report could ever document. I cooperated with the inquiries, my answers carefully vague, sticking to the accepted narrative. To speak the truth would have been to invite a different kind of confinement. In the aftermath, a strange quiet settled over me. The whispers from Sunnyside seemed distant, their power diminished. The matron's presence, That constant cold pressure was gone. I had faced something elemental, something ancient, and survived. The crucifix Brother Kellen had given me was lost in the chaos, but I no longer felt the acute need for its tangible comfort. The real battle, I understood, had been fought with will, with sacrifice, and with the desperate protective rage of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. Years passed. I moved on, found work in a quiet bookstore in a distant city. I rarely thought of St. Albine, or at least I tried not to. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the silence of my small apartment was too profound, I would catch a faint, almost imperceptible scent. Antiseptic, old stone, and the faintest, sweetest hint of something burning. One blustery autumn afternoon, browsing a dusty antique shop, my fingers brushed against a small, velvet-lined box. Inside, nestled on faded satin, was a child's sketchbook, its pages filled with crude, vibrant drawings, mostly flowers, animals. But on the very last page, rendered in a single, vivid crimson pencil, was a drawing of a house. A tall, Gothic house with narrow, empty windows. And in one of those windows, almost hidden in the shadows, stood a tiny stick-figure woman in a long, dark dress. I closed the sketchbook, a coldness seeping into my bones that had nothing to do with the autumn chill. The matron was Ash, her power broken at St. Albine. But her idea, her essence perhaps could be redrawn, recalled. The canvas was wide, and there were always innocent hands, and always new walls waiting for new pictures. The art, it seemed, was never truly finished. And somewhere, always, a crimson pencil waited.